The Mesilat Yesharim in Perek Aleph starts off explaining what is man's mission in this world. And he says that Hashem created the world for man, lehit aneg al Hashem, for man to take pleasure from God. V'lehanot miziv shchinato. Why? Why did Hashem create the world with that goal in mind, for man to have pleasure from Hashem? Says the Mesilat Yesharim, shezehu hata'anug ha'amiti v'ha'idun hagadol mikol ha'idunim, because it is the greatest delight and the greatest pleasure. Meaning, were there to be a greater pleasure, then God would have created the world for that. Had eating meat been the greatest pleasure possible, there would be a mitzvah, a command, to eat meat all day. But, being that the greatest pleasure is the relationship with Hashem, therefore Hashem created the world with that in mind. Because the goal of the universe is to bring man the greatest pleasure possible. Based on this, Rav Chatzkel Sarna explains a very difficult chazal. We're all familiar with the story of Avraham Avinu after his Brit Milah. He's sitting and talking to God. Hashem came to visit him. Hashem came to do Bikur Cholim. And he's in the middle of experiencing a godly vision of Avraham Avinu. And all of a sudden he sees three people coming. They're actually angels dressed as people. And Avraham Avinu wants to do the mitzvah of Achnasat Orchim. And he turns to God and says, hold it right there, Hashem, and I'm going to run take care of these three people. And the Gemara is obviously troubled. How do you do that? You're talking to Hashem. Says the Gemara, we see from here something very interesting. Gadol Achnasat Orchim mikabalat Pnei Shechina. Greater is the mitzvah of Achnasat Orchim, of greeting these strangers and taking care of them. That's greater than actually talking to Hashem, which is hard to understand. Based on this Mesilat Yesharim, says Rav Chatzkel Sarna, we can understand it. Being that God's mission in this world was just to bring man pleasure, and that was God's mission in the world, then clearly it makes sense for Avraham Avinu to stop talking to God, to go take care of these people. Being that, what was the idea of Avraham Avinu talking to God all about? It was for Avraham Avinu to get pleasure, a relationship with Hashem. So if Avraham Avinu chooses to do God's work, the greatest work, which is bring these three men pleasure, that is a continuation of God's vision. That's not an insult to God. That is the purpose of the entire world. So there was no insult here. It was Avraham Avinu continuing God's work. Additionally, we say it in Kabbalat Shabbat, that Sof Ma'aseh v'Machshavat Tchila. Shabbat was Sof Ma'aseh. It was the end of God's works. But it was Machshavat Tchila. It was his first Machshava. Meaning, it was what God had in mind from the very beginning of creation. And here again, Shabbat we know is Oneg Shabbat. Shabbat we know is Me'en Olam Haba. And that was really the Machshavat Tchila. That really was what Hashem was planning when he created the world at the very beginning. Why? Again, because the world is created for our Oneg, for our pleasure. If the greatest pleasure was something else other than a relationship with Hashem, that's what we would have been created for. But we were created for pleasure, the greatest pleasure, which is lehitaneg al Hashem. Now, if we can just go back to the opening line, he says, before he tells us what I've just shared with you, and that is our goal, our mission, is to have pleasure from Hashem. He says, you've got to be mitbarer umitamet. Yitbarer v'yitamet etzel ha'adam chovato. What does yitbarer v'yitamet mean? This message that we just spoke today, it's not enough to know it, but it has to be barur, clear, crystal clear to you. But that's not enough. It has to be emet. Now, emet literally means truth, but I believe here it means real, tangible. A person can know and study the danger of fire, and it's crystal clear. And then, God forbid, a person could feel it. That's emet. That's real. This idea that there is nothing greater in life than the relationship with Hashem, that is the greatest pleasure. And we were created for that. For us to succeed in learning the rest of this sefer, the rest of this book, we have to know it with crystal clarity, but more, it has to be emet, real to us, tangible.